In this video, we're going to talk about how to plan a fundraising event. My name is Dan Kimball, product specialist at Aplos Software. You know, in planning fundraising events, there are tons of events out there. Everybody's kind of looking for that magic bullet or how to raise a lot of money for your nonprofit organization. But today what I want to do is kind of walk you through and talk a little bit about, what are the basic components of any kind of event, whether it's a huge event, such as like a dinner banquet or a gala, or something even smaller scale. Either way, there are some basic core components we want to talk about. The first thing you want to do when planning an event is actually identify its purpose. What is it that you're actually trying to accomplish with the event? For example, there's fundraising events where you're actually raising money, and there's actually such a thing called a friend-raising event, where maybe the money is not important, but maybe you're just introducing people to your nonprofit organization, church, or ministry. So you want to really kind of get its purpose down. What is it exactly you're trying to accomplish by doing this event? And then after you identify its purpose, of course you want to set a goal. How much money are you trying to raise, or what is it you're trying to accomplish through that event? So let's say, for example, let's just take, for the sake of this video, a gala or a dinner or some kind of dinner type of function. You want to set a financial goal, and then of course you want to set a budget. So you want to raise $50,000. How much is it going to cost you to put this particular event on? Once you kind of get those in place, then of course you got to get into the nitty gritty, the details, putting that thing on. We all know, especially for small nonprofits, you still have to do your regular job. You still got the work of your mission to do. So you throw an event in there, it can get real busy. So what I recommend people doing is identifying or putting together some kind of leadership team. It could be volunteers led by a staff member from your nonprofit or church. It could be an all-volunteer group. It could be your group paid staff. But either way, somebody who's kind of the point that's really in charge of putting that particular event on. We call that a committee. You could call that a volunteer committee. So once you kind of have those basics, of course, then comes the planning. And then you want to identify who your target audience is, who you're trying to get there. That's going to be really important based off the event. If it's are you looking for a younger crowd? Are you looking for a group of alumni? Are you looking for big donors? Are you looking for both? Everybody, wants that perfect scenario where I want all ages and I want to raise $1 million. Well, that may or may not happen in your first try. But either way, those are good things to talk about. And really zero in on who it is your audience is, who you're targeting. For example, it might be a tournament of some kind. Well, you're going to say, well, we're going to look for kind of a younger audience. Maybe younger people don't want to do a traditional sit-down banquet, or vice versa. Maybe if you're trying to reach out to an older group, they're not going to want like a concert or something like that. So I think that's kind of an obvious type of thing. So it's really important that you, as you start to plan and promote, you really identify and keep in mind who it is you're targeting and how you target them. If it's an older audience, you're probably going to want to reach out more by a traditional invitation and an email. If it's a younger audience, you might want to look into doing a Facebook or a text or something in that matter as well. And then, of course, you got to promote it. And really give yourself enough time. For me, what's really frustrating as a fundraiser is when I hear about or find out that organizations have put on this really cool event. They've done the planning, they've set a budget, they've set a goal, and then all of a sudden they didn't give themselves enough time to get the word out. So all of a sudden I get an invitation for something that's like in 2 weeks. So even as much to go back and do something like what's called a save the date card or a save the date notification, 6 months out, 4 months out, something like that. So those are details that have become really important in promoting and putting on that particular event. So again, when talking about your target audience, there's a couple ways you can approach it. You have to kind of ask your question, are we going for the audience, or are you trying to put on that particular fundraiser? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg kind of debate. If you think about it that way, what's more important? Well, I think the biggest thing is you want to think about it more of how well do you know your donors and prospects. I think that's really the first question you want to ask. If you Google best fundraising idea in the world, you're going to get 1,000 different searches and opinions and things like that. Or if somebody comes to you and says, hey, this organization over here did this really awesome dinner banquet. They did a live auction. They auctioned off a house in Maui and a boat cruise and all this, and they raised $500,000. You should do that. And you go, okay, great, let's do that. But you're a brand new organization. You haven't been around for 3 or 4 years. You might not have the donor base to do that kind of event. So it's really important, I think, before you even get into any kind of event, understand and know your audience. Are you young? Are you old? Are you both? Kind of thing. Or even do a survey. You can very simply is throw out a survey to your donor, or if you have an advisory board, get some feedback kind of that way. So let's go on with this. Let's suppose you're going to do this dinner or this banquet. You've got everything in motion. You have maybe a group planning it. And one of the things you want to think about is the actual setup of that event. What a lot of people don't realize is that the time involved. You get the promotion out. Maybe there's invitation. There's RSVPs involved. But now you have event day or event weekend. There's setup involved. So you really want to be thinking strategically about what does that look like? Do you need extra volunteers? Are you going to close down your office for the day? A lot of people don't realize just sort of the little details. Another little item that I really like to encourage people when talking about special events is the actual practice, what we call a walkthrough. A lot of people, they maybe don't think about the location, and maybe there's some logistical things. Do you have a plan A? Do you have a plan B? What if it rains? Is it indoor? Is it outdoor? All those kinds of things. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you kind of want to take a step back and go, yeah, these are the kinds of things you want to think about. So not only do you have setup day, but you actually have a practice day where maybe you walk through the registration process. Want to make sure your technology works. If you're doing registrations with your computer, or maybe you're taking donations, that kind of thing. And then finally, of course, you have the details of the event. The last thing to think about in doing a special event is the follow-up. What happens after the event? Are you going to ask for donations at the event? Are you going to ask people to respond or give you something after the event? And then last but not least, my favorite thing to do is to thank people. You got to have a thank you plan. And one of I think the great, I'll call it the great sins of a fundraising event is having a bunch of people come to your event and not taking down any kind of information, an email. Who did they come with? Some way to reach back out to them and say, hey, thanks for coming. Because of your attendance, the following happened. We raised this much money. 300 people became more aware of our mission in downtown, wherever you may be, kind of thing. So don't forget to thank and then build off of that. Another thing to think about when doing a special event is your volunteer base and your volunteer core. That in itself can become very important. A good volunteer base can save you obviously a lot of time, a lot of money in some cases in terms of staffing. But you really want to think through, first of all, who are your volunteers and how are you getting them, and to make sure that on the day of the event, there's someone that's giving those volunteers particular tasks and things to do. Are they working in shifts? Are they working the whole time? For example, a lot of people don't think through. Let's say you're doing this dinner, this banquet. You have 40 tables that you've sold, and you have volunteers, and their jobs are over around dinner time. Are you going to feed them? Are you going to feed them the same dinner that the guests of that event, or are you going to maybe do pizza for them in the back? Those things will add to your expenses as well. So just really have a strategy about, again, who your volunteers are and who's kind of responsible for giving them tasks. Because at the end of the day, you can't fire. You can maybe ask them to not come back, but it can be kind of awkward if you have a volunteer that you don't either know what to do with, or maybe a volunteer shows up and maybe they're not as helpful as you would hope. So be thinking about that as you build out your event. And then the last thing I just kind of want to touch on is the difference between a really good event versus maybe a not so good event. And I really think it comes down into planning. And we all know there's always going to be circumstances that maybe we can't control. That's the great kind of joy and stress about a special event. You just can't predict. I, as an example, recall a time I was responsible for a fundraising dinner, and we had this really beautiful lighting
pieces, and in the middle of the event, 2 of them caught on fire during the event, and it was pretty wild and funny at the afterwards, but it certainly took us by surprise. But luckily, we had a couple people that got right on it, put the fire out. They kind of distracted the guests, say it's no big deal, we're going to keep moving on. But it was something that, and I could probably give you a lot of other examples of things that have maybe gone wrong. But really, what you want to think of, the difference between a well-planned event is really thinking out some of the details ahead of time. I think things like the registration and food lines, those are 2 areas that can really be the difference between what I'll call a clunky event versus a smooth running event. Are people waiting around for too long to get to their table, or is it unorganized? So I really think that to do an event, you really want to think through the planning and some of the steps ahead of time so that it's a really good experience from the guest standpoint. So I hope you enjoyed this video, you find it useful. Be sure and subscribe if you want more videos like this, and certainly give us some feedback, add some comments in there, tell us about your event experience, and we'll love to hear from you.